1 minute ago, King Charles was humiliated in front of the entire nation. What began as frustration on the streets has erupted into full-blown fury. Across Britain, millions are demanding one thing and one thing only: an immediate general election. The anger is not quiet, it is not polite, and it is not going away. For the first time in decades, the monarchy itself is being dragged into the chaos of UK politics, with people openly questioning whether Charles can still remain above the storm. The chants are deafening, the rage is raw, and the political system is cracking under the pressure. Britain has reached breaking point, and the king now faces the greatest challenge of his reign. The scenes sweeping across Britain are unlike anything seen in living memory. From London to Leeds, from Edinburgh to Liverpool, a wave of protests has surged through the country. Ordinary families, pensioners, and young people are flooding the streets, carrying one message in unison: general election now. It began with scattered demonstrations, but within hours the anger exploded into something far more dangerous: a coordinated national movement that even the government cannot ignore. Social media platforms are consumed by a single trend. Humiliated king and election now dominate feeds, reaching tens of millions of views in a matter of hours. What triggered this sudden fury? A symbolic humiliation. Just minutes ago, a massive crowd outside Buckingham Palace erupted with boos as Charles appeared in public. The chants were not of loyalty or respect, but of rage and betrayal. For the king, who inherited his crown amid deep scepticism, this moment cuts deep. For the monarchy, it is nothing short of catastrophic. The fury is not directed at Charles alone, but at what he represents: the power of tradition in a system that millions now see as broken. Britain is in crisis. The cost of living has spiralled to levels unseen in generations. Ordinary citizens cannot afford heating, rent, or food. Net migration has reached record highs, fueling cultural divisions. Public trust in Parliament has collapsed to historic lows. And now the anger has turned toward the palace, where Britons believe Charles holds the power to break the deadlock. Constitutional experts point to one explosive truth: the king still holds the legal authority, through royal prerogative, to dissolve Parliament in moments of extreme crisis. This power has not been used for nearly a century, but its existence changes everything. Protesters argue that this is not merely about politics. It is about survival, legitimacy, and justice. The humiliation Charles suffered moments ago was not accidental. It was a deliberate signal from the people that they are no longer content with silence. For decades, the monarchy has survived by standing above politics, never taking sides, never intervening. But the rage of this moment threatens to shatter that careful balance. If Charles does nothing, he risks being remembered as the king who stood by while Britain collapsed around him. If he acts, he will plunge the country into the greatest constitutional crisis since the English Civil War. Either choice carries unthinkable consequences. Right now, Parliament is trapped in paralysis. Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party, insists that calls for royal intervention are dangerous and anti-democratic, but his own party's approval ratings are plummeting. The Conservatives, already battered by scandal and division, are in chaos. Backbench rebellions grow daily. Cabinet ministers whisper of betrayal, and even traditional allies admit privately that the government has lost all credibility. The people have lost faith in both major parties. They are turning to the crown, not out of love, but out of desperation. That desperation is now boiling into rage, and Charles stands at the centre of it. His silence, his hesitation, and his attempts to remain neutral are no longer enough. Every passing hour only fuels the fire. The king has become the unwilling symbol of Britain's crisis. A crisis that is not only political, but constitutional, cultural, and existential. The humiliation he suffered today will echo through history. The question is simple, but terrifying. Will this moment push him to act, or will his inaction seal the fate of the monarchy forever? The rage on Britain's streets is no longer a whisper in the wind. It has become a roar that threatens to tear the entire system apart. What began as frustration with soaring prices and political corruption has turned into something far more dangerous: a direct challenge to the legitimacy of Parliament itself. The humiliation of King Charles has only poured fuel on the fire. Outside Westminster, chants of "Dissolve it now" echo through the night as protesters demand the king use his hidden weapon, the royal prerogative, to force new elections. To many, this is no longer about politics, but about survival. For the monarchy, the stakes could not be higher. If Charles refuses to act, the people may see him as powerless, irrelevant, and unworthy of their loyalty. If he dares to act, he risks breaking Britain's constitution in ways that cannot be undone. The fury is being measured in numbers, and those numbers are staggering. Recent polling shows trust in Parliament has collapsed to just 18%, the lowest ever recorded. Meanwhile, nearly half of Britons, 46%, now say they support the King dissolving Parliament to force fresh elections. Among working-class voters, that number rises to over 70%. These are not radicals or fringe activists. These are factory workers, nurses, delivery drivers, and pensioners, ordinary citizens who feel abandoned by both major parties. They see Charles as their last resort, the only figure capable of breaking the deadlock. But every step the King takes, or refuses to take, only tightens the noose around the monarchy itself. Inside the halls of power, panic is spreading like wildfire. Senior Conservatives are openly terrified. Whispers of cabinet resignations grow louder, with some ministers admitting privately that a general election may be the only way to prevent royal intervention. Keir Starmer, sensing opportunity but fearing disaster, has doubled down on his warning that royal powers must not be used. Yet his words are falling flat, drowned out by the noise of a nation that no longer believes in parliamentary promises. For Starmer, the crisis is a nightmare. If Charles acts, Starmer's warnings will look weak. If Charles stays silent, Starmer inherits a political system so discredited it may destroy him as well. The humiliation of Charles has become the humiliation of the entire establishment. Outside Buckingham Palace, banners reading "Act now or step aside" have appeared overnight. Social media platforms are flooded with clips of Charles being booed, each video reaching millions within minutes. The humiliation is not just political, it is personal. Charles, who fought for decades to modernise the monarchy's image, is now painted as indecisive and powerless. The crown, once a symbol of stability, is now seen by many as a symbol of inaction. This is the nightmare scenario his advisors feared most. Behind palace walls, the debate is tearing the royal household apart. Traditional courtiers urge silence, insisting that neutrality is the only way to preserve the monarchy. Younger advisors argue that silence is no longer neutral, but a dangerous choice that could end the monarchy altogether. Some even believe that intervention is the only way to restore public trust, even if it risks plunging the country into chaos. This split is widening with every passing day, and Charles finds himself caught between two irreconcilable paths. The pressure is relentless, the humiliation unbearable, and the clock is ticking. Outside Britain, the world is watching in shock. European leaders whisper fears of instability spreading across the continent. Washington is quietly pressing for calm, desperate to avoid chaos in its closest ally. Financial markets tremble with each headline, the pound dropping further as investors flee uncertainty. Allies are confused, enemies are delighted, and the global stage waits for Britain's king to make his move. The humiliation of Charles has become an international crisis. His decision, or his silence, will shape not only Britain's future, but the stability of democracies across the world. And yet, amid the chaos, the people's demand is brutally simple. They do not care about legal precedent or diplomatic fallout. They want an election, and they want it now. Every chant, every banner, every furious social media post sends the same message. If Charles refuses to act, the monarchy itself may be the next institution to fall. The humiliation of today is only the beginning. Tomorrow it could become revolution. The storm that has engulfed Britain is no longer contained by speeches in Parliament or press conferences from Number 10. It has spilled into every corner of the nation, with fury spreading faster than the government can control. What makes this crisis unlike any other is not only the collapse of trust in politicians, but the collapse of trust in the very system itself. Britons are no longer shouting at MPs. They are shouting at the monarchy, at the king, demanding that he act where their politicians have failed. And with every chant, with every headline declaring humiliation for Charles, the monarchy is dragged deeper into the fire. The pressure is not just political, it is cultural, generational, and explosive. Young Britons, many of whom grew up sceptical of the crown, are suddenly rallying behind it for one reason. They believe only the monarchy can break the grip of a parliament they see as corrupt and broken. For Gen Z and millennials, royal intervention is no longer about loyalty to tradition. It is about tearing down a system they feel has betrayed them. Among older Britons, once the bedrock of royal support, the split is more painful. Many feel torn between respect for constitutional traditions and the raw anger of seeing their livelihoods destroyed by soaring costs. Some argue the king must stay above politics, but more and more are asking, what good is a monarch who refuses to defend his people in their darkest hour? Inside Parliament, the fear is palpable. Starmer insists that a general election will come only through parliamentary processes, warning that royal interference would plunge Britain into chaos. Yet his words ring hollow, as Labour's approval ratings sink alongside the Conservatives. Neither party has an answer to the cost of living crisis, the collapse in public services, or the anger boiling on the streets. The humiliation of Charles has become a weapon for the public, proof that the entire establishment, political and royal alike, has failed them. Each passing day without action turns this humiliation into something far more dangerous: contempt. Meanwhile, the king's advisers scramble for a way forward. Constitutional scholars argue late into the night about whether royal prerogatives, long thought dormant, can be revived in moments of national emergency. Some say yes, pointing to centuries-old precedents where monarchs dissolved parliaments against government wishes. Others warn that any attempt would trigger a constitutional earthquake, one that could rip apart Britain's unwritten constitution and permanently damage the monarchy. The palace is torn in two between fear of chaos and fear of irrelevance. Charles's decision, or indecision, is becoming the pivot on which Britain's future now turns. But the rage outside will not wait for palace debates. Protesters are no longer content with chanting outside Parliament. They are marching in industrial towns, in rural villages, in city centres once considered apolitical. Manchester, Birmingham, Glasgow, Cardiff. The chant is the same: general election now. Social media amplifies their voices, turning local anger into a national inferno. Hashtags calling for elections and mocking the king's silence dominate every platform. Videos of Charles being booed have become rallying cries for a movement that grows stronger with every humiliating. Internationally, the crisis is escalating. European newspapers speak of Britain as if it were a nation on the brink of collapse. American analysts warn of instability in a key ally. Financial markets, already fragile, continue to nosedive with every rumour of royal intervention. The pound weakens, bond yields spike, and investors openly question whether Britain is still a safe place to do business. Yet some argue that decisive action, even by the king, could restore confidence by breaking the deadlock. The world holds its breath, waiting for Charles to decide if he will risk everything to act or risk everything by doing nothing. The humiliation of today may soon become the revolution of tomorrow. Britain is trapped in a countdown, each tick of the clock bringing the nation closer to a breaking point. Parliament is paralysed, the government is collapsing, and the monarchy faces the greatest test of its survival in centuries. For Charles, there is no safe option left. Either he intervenes and triggers a constitutional earthquake, or he stands aside and watches as his people turn their backs on the crown forever. The chants outside his palace are not fading, they are growing louder. The king's silence has become unbearable, and the people's patience is running out. Britain is now teetering on the edge of a moment that feels less like modern democracy and more like the opening act of a historic upheaval. The humiliation of King Charles has hardened into something far more dangerous: a full-scale rebellion of public opinion. This is not the quiet grumbling of a discontented electorate. It is the roar of a nation that believes it has been abandoned. Outside Downing Street, outside Buckingham Palace, outside town halls across the country, the same words are painted on banners and screamed into megaphones. Dissolve Parliament, general election now. The fury is relentless, and for the first time in living memory, it is directed not only at politicians, but at the monarch himself. What makes this moment so explosive is that every institution is collapsing at once. Parliament is despised, the government is fractured, the opposition is distrusted, and now the monarchy is being dragged into the chaos. The people are not just questioning who should govern them, they are questioning whether the entire system is even worth saving. The humiliation Charles suffered just days ago, being booed by the very citizens who once pledged loyalty to the crown, has become a symbol of this breakdown. It was more than an insult. It was a declaration that silence and neutrality are no longer acceptable. Every cheer, every chant was a demand. Act or be swept away with the rest. Behind closed doors, the panic inside Buckingham Palace is reaching fever pitch. Advisers argue deep into the night. Traditionalists plead with Charles to protect the monarchy's sacred neutrality, warning that once the crown chooses a side, it can never return to the safety of being above politics. But younger advisers, emboldened by the fury on the streets, insist that neutrality is no longer an option. In their view, silence is itself a political act, one that could destroy the monarchy by appearing weak, irrelevant, and unwilling to defend the people in their hour of need. This divide is tearing at the palace's foundations, leaving Charles trapped between two irreconcilable choices. Meanwhile, Parliament is disintegrating before the nation's eyes. Conservative MPs openly admit the government cannot survive much longer, some even whispering that a royal dissolution might be less humiliating than another crushing election defeat at the hands of Labour. But Labour, far from looking like a saviour, is collapsing under the weight of its own failures. Keir Starmer's speeches about respecting parliamentary process sound hollow to voters who cannot afford their bills or trust their leaders. In the eyes of the public, both parties are guilty. Both have betrayed them, and both deserve to be swept away. The chants for an election are not just about replacing one party with another, they are about resetting the entire system. The international stage has become a mirror of Britain's turmoil. European leaders speak in hushed tones of instability in one of the world's oldest democracies. Washington worries about chaos consuming its closest ally. Commonwealth nations watch nervously, knowing that what Charles does, or refuses to do, will echo in their own political debates. Financial markets shudder with every headline. The pound tumbles, investors flee, and global analysts question whether Britain is still the anchor of stability it once was. Every moment of silence from the palace is costing the nation billions. But to the protesters in the streets, the economics matter less than the principle. They believe the king holds the key to their future, and they will not stop until he uses it. The humiliation of Charles has now become the humiliation of Britain itself. The monarchy, once seen as the ultimate symbol of unity and strength, is now caught in the same storm as the politicians it sought to remain above. And as each day passes, the people grow louder, angrier, and more determined. The clock is ticking, the nation is boiling, and the king stands at the edge of a decision that will either redefine his reign or end the monarchy as Britain has known it for 1,000 years. What comes next will not be dictated by tradition, precedent, or carefully worded statements from palace spokespeople. What comes next will be defined by how a monarch, one born into power but forged in scepticism, chooses to confront a nation in open revolt. Every hour of silence deepens the fracture. Every refusal to acknowledge the public's plea hardens resentment into something more volatile. The chants outside Buckingham Palace are no longer isolated cries of frustration. They are the beginnings of a movement, a democratic uprising with constitutional implications the country hasn't faced in generations. Charles now stands not just as a sovereign, but as a symbol. To some, he represents continuity, a stabilising figurehead meant to weather storms without interference. To others, he represents the last possible lever of change in a political system they believe no longer serves them. And in the eyes of millions, silence is complicity. If the king does not act now, they argue, then he is no better than the politicians they already distrust. The longer he waits, the greater the risk. What began as mass protest may become a constitutional confrontation with global consequences. Foreign leaders are already recalibrating their stance on Britain's future. Investment firms are pulling back. Even some members of the Commonwealth are privately wondering whether the king's indecision reflects a broader decay in Britain's leadership. Inside the palace, the urgency is palpable. Security has been tightened. Emergency meetings are being held with constitutional experts and political historians. Every option carries unprecedented risk. A formal address to the nation. It could ignite tensions further. A call to dissolve Parliament. It would trigger a constitutional crisis unseen since the days of monarchical rule. Remaining silent? It could make the monarchy irrelevant overnight. As social unrest intensifies, Parliament is quickly losing its grip on authority. Laws proposed are either stalled or outright ignored by a population that no longer believes in legislative solutions. The streets have become louder than the Commons. Public discourse is no longer shaped by party leaders but by live streams, protest chants and viral videos of Charles being heckled. The media has become the battleground, and perception is everything.